country and we the people on UST Party Radio.
Welcome to UST Party Radio, God, Country, and We the People, with Bill Gruber and Kaz Taylor.
You know, we're back with historian Bill Federer of the American Minute, and he's heard throughout the United States. And, Bill, one of the great things about the U.S. Constitution is that it allows for amendments, and there are too many 27 to go over here today in this segment. So, but let's highlight them and let's talk about the ones most vital to where we are today. If you would, Bill, just briefly tell us the value of the amendment process.
Well, at 2/3 of the states, or it can originate in Congress, but it needs to be ratified by the states. It's made very difficult because they want to make sure that this is really what the people want. And it, again, is a limit on the government. The founders viewed these amendments as handcuffs on the power of the federal government. So I call them 10 handcuffs. They wanted to limit Congress. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Congress shall not take away the right of freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of right to travel by your peers, right to possess and bear arms. Congress shall not. Congress shall. These are all limits on the federal government to prevent it from becoming a totalitarian monster.
And so we have the first 10 amendments, and then after that, through the years, all the way through, I think the last amendment was in 1992, but now you have 27. But the first 10 were the hallmarks, hey? And so talk a little bit about the first 10 briefly, and then we'll spend some time on what the government has done in the additional amendment processes.
Right. Well, Congress put religion first because that was the most important. They wanted to preserve people's freedom to have their Christian faith. Every colony was started by a different Christian denomination. Virginia was Anglican, Massachusetts was Puritan, Rhode Island was Baptist, Maryland was Catholic. They didn't get along, but they had to work together to fight the king. After the Revolution, they wanted to make sure no one Christian denomination was chosen by the federal government, because many states had the state Christian religion and state Protestantism and congregational church. And so Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Respecting means concerning, so Congress can't do anything for it, and they can't do anything against it. But we have this freedom of religion. You can join a religion, you can leave a religion. That is not so in Islam. Or Islamic Sharia law, if you leave Islam, you get killed. Yep. And so that's why Oklahoma wants to outlaw Sharia law, because it's contrary to our Constitution.
First Amendment constitutional right. And this constitutional amendment was ratified or put in there in 1791. And all the first 10 were put in 1791, and then the 11th and beyond were thereafter, including the 11th, which was 1795, and then the 12th in 1804, and so forth and so on. But now the Second Amendment right, we're getting a lot of heat on that, the right to bear arms. Quickly talk about that.
Well, that was the means to make sure that the government didn't get oppressive, that if the people was armed, it would prevent a monarchy from seizing power. And
it really cuts down on the criminal activity as well, one has proven in many ways.
Right. If everybody has a gun, the criminals think twice before they come up to you to rob you.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Third Amendment, the quartering of soldiers.
Right. The government could come up to your house and say, we're going to put our soldiers in here. You live in the barn or the attic. And the people said, we don't want the federal government having the power to seize our property and use it for their own use. But that's what's happening right now with a lot of the EPA, a lot of the OSHA environmental rules, where the government can come onto your farm and say, guess what? You can't farm on that field. You can't do this. You can't do that. They're cutting off water in California because of a little smelt fish that they found. And so they didn't want the government seizing their personal use of their property.
So that's the Third Amendment. Well, the Fourth Amendment is tied to that, dealing with search and seizure. And boy, oh boy, speaking of searches and illegal searches, this is really on the forefront these days if you go through an airport security system, doesn't it?
Right, and that basically violates this. And also, the government uses crises. Rahm Emanuel, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so the government is using crisis to usurp control. And so with cell phones, they can track everything everywhere you go. They can listen through your cell phone, even if it's not dialed, not turned on. And they can track your emails, your Google searches, and so there's an invasion of privacy. And a lot of these issues, the government under Obama actually wants to take over the Internet, and there's bills working their way through Congress right now.
Let's talk about the Fifth Amendment that was ratified in 1791, grand jury, double jeopardy, self-incrimination, that kind of thing, due process.
Yeah, many founders thought this is the most important one. Jury duty. Would you rather be judged by one king-appointed political judge, or would you rather trust a trial of the jury of your peers?
Do you think there's any of our amendments being violated now by the government in terms of...
Maybe a better question would be how many of them are.
Yeah, how many?
Yeah, well, obviously the 9th and 10th Amendments, those are ones, it was like playing cards. The states gave the federal government some cards to play with, and they said all the rest of the cards remain under the state jurisdiction. That's what the 9th and 10th Amendments are. Limited are the powers that we're granting to the federal government, and you only have these enumerated things. Everything else is under the state's control. But the 14th Amendment changed that. The 14th Amendment was to give rights to freed slaves, and these activist judges, based on evolution, they said, well, if species can evolve, laws can evolve, and we're just going to make the laws evolve. And the 14th Amendment invalidated the 9th and 10th Amendment. The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery. 14th Amendment, a lot of the southern states were not granting freed slaves any rights. You had the Republicans going down, registering the freed slaves to vote. They were called the Radical Party. And then the Democrats in the Deep South, they were passing Jim Crow laws and black codes to require freed slaves to be apprenticed to employers, and they couldn't be seen on the street without their employer's permission. If they were arrested. And so they were basically reinstituting slavery, calling it apprentice and employer. And so a Republican, John Bingham of Ohio, pushed through the 14th Amendment to force the states to give rights to freed slaves. And some debates said, wait a second, maybe this 14th Amendment might be used by the federal government to take other rights away from the states. John Bingham said, I repel that suggestion, yet that's exactly what happened, that the federal judges began to use this 14th Amendment like a box of chocolates. They would, say, oh, how can we reinterpret this amendment and that amendment? And they basically invalidated the first 8 amendments, which were meant to limit the federal government, and now the federal government's using those amendments to limit the states. They're taking the handcuffs off their wrists and putting them on the states.
We skipped over the 6th and 7th here, talking about the rights to jury trial, these kinds of things. What was it prior to an amendment like this? What was the king just said, hey, you're guilty, and that's it?
Right. The Declaration of Independence talks about how the judges were political appointees of the King of England, and they were indebted to him for their jobs. And so if you were a loyalist or a patriot, and you go before this loyalist judge, you could not find justice. And so they said, wait a second, we're going to make sure that we don't have this abuse of power through the judges. The 17th Amendment changed it so senators were not elected by the state legislatures. They were elected by the people. Now, that sounds great, but to run for a statewide office, you have to be independently wealthy or indebt yourself to those that are independently wealthy to be elected, whereas before, if the state legislature elected their U.S. senators, the senators were always looking out for states' rights. They wanted to be pulling the leash on the federal government. They were always wanting to make sure the federal government stayed smaller. But once the senators were elected by people that could swing large blocks of votes, unions and so forth, the senators cared less about limiting the state government. Now the senators are mostly in favor of growing the federal government because they're in charge of it.
Ah, I see. So these amendments, now, what can be done to alter some of these amendments? Another amendment to alter some of the other amendments? Just like you said, the 14th Amendment kind of fought against some of the earlier amendments. Is there an amendment process that the citizens can do to nullify some of these other things? Well, we've only got about a minute and a half, and I'm sorry about that.
No. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Right now, it's the judges that are reinterpreting. There's 2 types of judges. One that wants to stick with what the founders' intention was. A small federal government, state governments were more including the rights of taking care of the people's lives. So the smaller federal government. There's, since evolution came along, Charles Darwin, the middle 1800s, that species can evolve. Christopher Columbus Langdale, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., these Harvard judges decided that laws could evolve, and then these activist judges decided to reinterpret. So if we get rid of these activist judges.
So 30 seconds, word of inspiration and wisdom from Bill Federer. We need to have you back because we just scratching the surface.
Well, Ronald Reagan said the government that's big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take away everything you have. And so if you want the government to get bigger, we're going to return to the monarch, emperor of Rome scenario where it's patronage. If you're friends with the king, you're more equal. If you're not friends with the king, you're less equal. And if you're an enemy of the king, you're dead. It's called treason.
Well stated. Bill Federer of the American Minute on UST Party Radio, broadcasting from WSRadio.com, the worldwide leader in Internet talk.